I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 107 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruption and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to please keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please use only the approved earpieces. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Also, please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. In accordance with committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of today's meeting. I'd also like to make a few comments for the benefits of the members and the witnesses present and online. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. As a reminder, also all comments need to be addressed through the chair. From 11 till 12, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27th, 2023, the committee will commence its study of coercive behavior. I'd like to share a trigger warning. Before we welcome our witnesses, I'd like to provide this trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to violence and coercive control. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If you feel distressed and/or need help, please advise our clerk. For all the witnesses and for members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, so let's try and be compassionate with our conversations today. You will note that as your time is running near, I will raise my right hand 30 seconds remaining to give you a heads up, and we'll try and respect this so that we can get through the meeting as efficiently as possible to respect everybody's time. I would like now to welcome our witnesses. As an individual, we have Dimitri Pantazopoulos. Thank you. And I understand that she has acknowledged that she could be called Dimitri. Demetria, thank you. Also from the Barbara Schiffler Commemorative Clinic, we have Deepa Matthew, Executive Director, joining us by video conference. And from the Elspeth Hayworth Centre for Women, we also have Sunder Singh, Executive Director, also joining us by video conference. You will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks, followed by rounds of questions. I'd like to start by giving the floor to Demetria. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I need to press anything or no? You can hear me? Okay. So I can start. I would like to first start by expressing my sincerest, heartfelt gratitude for inviting me here to testify before you on a subject that is plaguing many children and women, coercive control. I'm here to ask that Canada steps up and abides by the report written by Ms. Reem Al-Salam, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, which states the discredited and unscientific pseudoscience of parental alienation is used in family law proceedings by abusers as a tool to continue their abuse and coercion and to undermine and discredit allegations of domestic violence made by women who are trying to keep their children safe. The standard of best interest of a child is violated by imposing contact with a father, even when there is evidence of domestic violence. It has absolutely nothing to do with lack of training for judges and everything to do with their intentional and willful blindness. For judges, it is contact with abusive fathers at all and any costs. I'm here to ask that our children be immediately returned to their mothers and that the pseudoscience of parental alienation in its like terms is banned and prohibited from being used.
Excuse me, Demetria. Can I kindly ask you to slow down a little bit just for our interpreters? Thank you so much.
I ask that the use of reunification camps and therapy for children as part of any outcome in legal proceedings be prohibited. I ask that abusive post-separation fathering tactics of accusing the mother of alienating the children against them be recognized as a form of coercive control, and that those judgments be reopened and that the children be returned to their mothers. The domestic violence wheel clearly indicates domestic violence is about control and entitlement. The more controlling a man is, the more dangerous he is. Canada encourages women to leave in order to protect our children and ourselves on claims that we have the right to live in dignity and in safety. However, when we do, that is not the reality we victims face. As soon as we leave our abuser, he suddenly becomes an even more powerful monster. A monster I would equate to the Greek mythological creature of Hydra, cut off one head and 3 more grow. We leave one abuser, and suddenly, like the Hydra, he grows more heads, and more abusers grow around him, empowering him to suffocate, torment, and torture our children, us, and our entire family. How? As you all know, my children and I have suffered and continue to suffer from abuse and coercive control at the hands of my ex-husband, George Giannopoulos. My 2 briefs, as well as the supporting documents submitted to you, clearly indicate the severity of the abuse and control from 1997, which continues to today. George, as you know, also attempted to silence this very committee by threatening to sue you, along with the House Speaker, the Director of Legislation. If that is not an indication of his immense control and entitlement, I don't know what is. Upon separation, George invoked parental alienation as an extension of his abuse and control. The more my children and I divulged abuse, the more it was seen as proof of alienation. And George, like all abusers, was able to grow more fearful heads, wearing the hats of youth protection, judges, and lawyers. In other words, everyone who in fact and in theory is supposed to protect victims of abuse were and are his most powerful and supportive allies and enablers. Like all mothers in this situation, as if George and our abusers needed more power over us, we lost custody of our children, lost our parental authority, and the right to even see our children. We were forced and court-ordered to self-represent. We lost our homes, and this coercive control that is being granted to abusers by court order spreads onto everyone in the maternal family, as somehow their rights to see our children is also removed. As you all know, my mother died at 1,000 days to the date my children were barbarically abducted by court order, and although she had hours to live, they still did not allow her to see my children. This is why I would like to name the Coercive Control Bill Nikki's Law, to honor my mom and to ensure this never happens again, so that the tragic way she died is not in vain. Just think, murderers on death row get their last wish, and a loving, innocent grandmother didn't. Rapists and murderers are able to see their children while in jail, yet protective mothers are prohibited from any and all contact. Coercive control knows no age limit and goes far beyond the children and their mother. There should be no statute of limitations for a victim to denounce abuse and controlling behavior. Victims that have filed charges on abuse should be able to reopen their files and add coercive control to their charges. We also need to be able to reopen our files post-judgment in any court. How does Canada expect victims to come forward with abuse when Canadian courts are just going to further empower our monsters? Countless children and mothers like me, threatened by youth protection, judges, and our own lawyers that if we continue to denounce abuse or speak about it, we will lose custody. Attempting to force our children and us into so-called reunification therapy, where the end result is for us to state by coercion and force that the abuse never happened and the father is safe. Is that not giving our abusers the ultimate control over us? Due to the youth protection system, lawyers and courts and judges all acting in solidarity with the abuser and the Machiavellian pseudoscience of parental alienation, our children were deliberately orphaned from their mother and placed in danger. The documents before you are clear. Our children are suffering and are in danger, and there is nothing we mothers are able to do to protect our children because of orders rendered against us by Canadian courts. I never had words strong enough to describe the pain I feel every day without my boys until the day I buried my mother and collapsed to my knees as they were lowering her into the ground. Being without my children feels like a double funeral every day since October 9th, 2019. 1,673 days today without my boys. What crime did we commit? Canada needs to step up and help us. Thank you. Sorry, I went to...
Thank you, Demetria. I'd like to invite Deepa Matthew, please. 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. Thank you for inviting me to share insights today. I'm Deepa Mattu, Executive Director and Lawyer with Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic, an organization dedicated to supporting survivors of violence, particularly marginalized and racialized women and gender diverse individuals located in Tekaronto, Toronto. Today, I aim to take you on a journey through the complexities of the coercive behavior, weaving in the story of Maria to illustrate the challenges survivors face in seeking justice. We are gathered here at a critical juncture in our understanding of gender-based violence. It is widely recognized as an epidemic, transcending boundaries of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. Within this landscape lies the insidious pattern of coercive behavior, a web of assault, threats, and humiliation designed to control survivors. Embedded within the gender-based violence, coercive behavior is a harmful pattern. It's not just one event, it's a series, often accompanied by emotional abuse, leaving victims feeling trapped and powerless. The challenges posed by coercive behavior are particularly pronounced within the legal system, especially for marginalized communities such as immigrants, refugees, and disabled and gender diverse individuals. This pattern of abuse often involves emotional manipulation, leaving victims feeling trapped and powerless. Furthermore, as the committee just heard, litigation abuse is a prevalent issue across legal domains, including family, where situations like parental alienation, control of children's custody, lack of spousal support, and so many other experiences. But there are also experiences within the criminal and the immigration law. Let me introduce you to Maria, a courageous woman caught in the grips of coercive control. Maria is a racialized immigrant woman with limited English proficiency. She found herself trapped in an abusive marriage here in Canada. Her husband, equipped with the resources and fluency in the language, manipulated the legal system to his advantage. He even flipped the narrative, getting Maria charged in a criminal case where he is the real perpetrator. It is a terrifying scenario where power imbalance and language barriers leaves Maria unjustly accused and vulnerable. Maria's story echoes the experience of countless survivors at the clinic. In response, many jurisdictions have enacted legislations to combat coercive control. In England, Wales, Scotland, they have introduced specific laws criminalizing coercive behavior. However, while these legal changes represent progress, they come with their own set of challenges. Criminalizing coercive behavior has not always resulted in increased conviction and reduced rate of domestic abuse. In fact, in many of these experiences, survivors find themselves further disempowered by the legal system, facing barriers to justice because the legal system does not understand the experiences of survivors. So can there be change? Of course. What can change for people like Maria? We must provide a training for criminal justice system actors and family law actors to better understand and respond to these coercive behavior cases. We need increased diversity among our justice system professionals to bring vital perspectives to foster trust with survivors.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind adjusting your microphone a little bit higher, closer between your nose and your mouth, just for the ease of the interpreter?
Sure.
Let's try that.
Can someone confirm if this is better?
It's not.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Just hold put for a minute. I'll pause your time, Deepa.
Okay.
Try speaking a few words, introducing yourself again.
Okay. I'm really sorry for the interpreters. Please confirm if this is better.
Mic a little bit higher, closer to in between your mouth and your nose. A little bit higher. There we go. Try that.
Okay. Is that better? Please let me know.
What the weather is like where you are, just to...
It's chilly, but the room I'm sitting in is pretty comfortable.
We're going to give it a try. So I again regret interrupting you in the middle of your testimony. If you can continue. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll take it up from recommendation for the changes that I was talking about, that can things be addressed and changed for folks like Maria, the survivor story that I was sharing with all of you. So there are a few things that can change, and one of them is the comprehensive training for criminal justice system and family law system actors to better understand and respond to the coercive behavior cases. We need increased diversity among our justice system professionals to bring vital perspectives and foster trust with survivors. We also need ensuring sustainable access to justice resources. Supporting organizations like ours that offer legal services can make a significant difference to survivors' experience in the legal system. Public legal education plays a vital role in empowering individuals and community to recognize and respond to coercive behavior. Integrating risk assessment into a legal proceeding is crucial for ensuring the safety and well-being of survivors and informing decisions regarding protective measures and support. What we find is that there is lack of collaboration between the stakeholders, which is essential to develop comprehensive risk management plans tailored to unique needs of survivors who are affected by the coercive behavior. In conclusion, I would say that addressing coercive behavior requires a multifaceted approach. By implementing these recommendations, we can create an environment where survivors like Maria and our witness before can receive support and justice they deserve. Thank you. I'm here to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Deepa. Next, we welcome Sunder Singh. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I have your permission, it would take 1 minute more than 5 minutes to complete my opening remarks. Can I proceed? Do I have your permission, Madam Chair?
Perhaps the best way that I'll go with this is our first round of questioning comes from Michelle Ferrari. Michelle, would you be willing to concede 1 minute of your 6 minutes to our witness?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 30 to 40 years ago, I could walk down Yonge Street of Toronto and spot girls selling their bodies. Only God knows who was making them work in the wee hours of the night, in the dead of winter. Madam Chair, the times have changed. We live in a digital world where demand for girls comes instantly on the phone, and the girl is supplied by the perpetrator to the men who now demand girls of the age of 12 and 13 to be sent to them. This is all done behind closed doors. Little girls who are not even teenagers are being supplied to the demand of men seeking girls younger and younger each year in our country, Canada. Canada, once seen as a beacon of safety and opportunity, is now grappling with the problem of human trafficking, and our country is now being labeled as the hub for human trafficking. Consider the alarming statistics in 3 years between 2019 and 2022. Over 1,500 calls were made by 2,170 victims of trafficking to a hotline dedicated for those calling for help. A staggering 67% of the calls from victims of human trafficking came from Ontario alone. 90% of those calls were from women and girls. This is the province where many newcomer youth settle. However, human trafficking happens all over Canada. This is mainly due to lack of awareness among the very young and vulnerable. They start their lives here with desperation to find jobs. They struggle to pay rent, which is unaffordable, and also to meet the expensive life of living in Canada. Young people face financial difficulties every day. They do not want to go back to their home countries for various reasons. Here in Canada, they're facing frying pan into the fire syndrome, making them vulnerable to labor and human trafficking as well, constantly fighting against cost of living. Catching the pimps is very tough as they are active on the social media, which is heavily used by very young people. Human trafficking is a lucrative business and cannot be stopped. It can be reduced considerably by making the young girls aware of the reality and how the system works. At Elspeth Hayward Center for Women, we have done so, and the youth we serve are now volunteers in the community doing well in schools, respect their parents, and strive to complete their studies and seek employment. They are aware of the luring done by perpetrators, posing to be their boyfriends. They are also aware that sharing passwords and banking information is not to be shared by anyone. It has proven to work at a micro level and needs to be expanded into a macro level across Canada. The laws are weak in Canada. The perpetrators are aware and take advantage of it and continue to reap enormous profits at the expense of our young female population, taking away their dignity and well-being. They're getting away because they are being allowed to do so. To properly address this epidemic, we must strike at its root cause, which is lack of awareness among our youth and parents regarding the true nature of human trafficking. The illusion of glamour surrounding the human trafficking can be shattered starting at the school level. But with federal government intervention, where children learn from grade 6 onwards during the start of the school lessons every morning for half hour to 45 minutes with interactive discussions and stories on topics that would make them responsible citizens. There is an urgent need for targeted intervention programs in our education system, making it mandatory in the school curricula, particularly in regions where trafficking activities are most prevalent. Basic human studies is lacking in our education system. This is also the reason why we see a strong prevalence of domestic violence, where many mothers are being teared away from their children, put into foster homes, that are also breeding grounds for human trafficking. By equipping our youth with knowledge and awareness, we can disrupt the supply chain of victims. We can pull the exploitation activities by the root. So what should the schools add to their curriculum? Frank discussions on the realities of trafficking, including its techniques and methods of recruitment, how traffickers have taken full advantage of the tools that are out there now, like social media, immigration desperation, a promise for housing, a promise for education, a promise for high-paying employment, making the kids aware that pimps are actually our everyday men and women that one would never ever suspect, and how society entrusts unwittingly in the human traffickers disguised as employers, consultants, agencies, etc. And the role of internet and social media. Madam Chair, education alone is not enough. We must also tackle the demand side of human trafficking by enforcing strict penalties for those who fuel this trade. Social network advertising must be outlawed and perpetrators held accountable immediately for their actions. We must provide comprehensive support services for survivors, including trade skills training and mental health resources to aid in their recovery and reintegration into society as trade-skilled individuals. Additionally, we must remain vigilant in scrutinizing foster homes and other care facilities which can unwittingly become breeding grounds for exploitation. In closing, Madam Chair, let us remember that the fight against human trafficking is not one we can afford to lose. Exploitation should have no place in Canada. The elected leaders should take cognizance for this horrible problem, reminding them that every problem has a solution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Sunder. Thank you all for your opening remarks. We'd like to move first to Conservative Party for 5 minutes. Michelle?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to our witnesses today. This is a very emotional, powerful study, as many of them are, that we do here in Status of Women. So coercive control is what we're looking at. And I'm going to start with, is Miss Singh? Is that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you, Miss Singh. Thank you for your testimony. This committee did do a human trafficking study, and in my community of Peterborough, Ontario, we have the 3rd highest rate of human trafficking in the country. And young kids in particular, young girls, are at risk. So I appreciate your testimony around human trafficking and the connection with coercive control. You focused a lot on education, which I think is incredible because it's the upstream end, basically, being upstream as opposed to intervention. I guess one of the things and one of the points of how we operate here is to get recommendations from witnesses into the report. But a lot of education is provincial jurisdiction. So I guess what I would be asking you is where do you see the federal government's role? And as much as I think educating kids in school is critical, I think one of the pieces I would also ask you about is educating the parents. You have a lot of parents who don't know how to use social media, and they freely allow their children access to it. You know, we have stories of kids who are sitting literally beside their parents on a couch watching a Raptors game, being human trafficked, and the parent has no idea. Another woman I spoke with who runs Little Warriors out of Alberta, an incredible organization helping child survivors, says that for the first time in their 10 years, they have parents trafficking their children, not for drugs or money, but because they can't afford to eat. Shocking, absolutely shocking. So as much as I think we need to reach the children and educate them, because I often think they're so much smarter than we are, right? They're quicker. Where do you see the federal government's role in reaching parents who don't know any different? Kids who are exposed to unhealthy relationships, kids who see a coercive control marriage or partnership but have no idea that that's what that is because that's their normal. And where do you see the federal government's role without intervening on sort of freedom of your ability to live your life? Sorry, that's a big question,
Absolutely.
but...
Yes, and thank you for all the information that you have shared with us. It is critical. The funding for the province is trickled from the federal government coffers, and it has to be made mandatory for the provincial government to have in schools an educational program, making it mandatory in the morning, first thing in the morning, to have discussions with children, share stories in a way that they understand what responsible citizens would mean, where gender equality is what makes the world a balanced world. It has to be taught in school and on a daily basis. And for the parents, education, we have at Elspeth Hayward Center have had programs for the parents to make them understand. So the federal government can fund the community centers where the parents come for, community programs, where the information, the awareness of domestic violence and human trafficking can be imparted to the parents through the community centers. And of course, I understand that the educational piece is a provincial, a responsibility, but the money, the funds come from the federal government.
Thank you for that. I think one of the pieces that we have to dance around is the toothpaste is out of the tube in terms of kids having access to social media and having phones at younger ages. And I'm still not sold on the fact of the government telling parents how to do that, but I also see the very negative implications of kids on their phones and on screen times and the addiction parents have to their cell phones. But I think one of the things we should be investing in, and I guess I would ask you this, is we know confident children with a lot of confidence are braver to predators. Children who have higher self-esteem, children who are accomplishing things. That comes through sports, that comes through activities, that can come through theater. And we have less and less kids ultimately doing these things because they're staying home, they're playing video games, they're cut on screens, they don't know how to interact with people as well as they used to. So I would love to see more programming around that and encouraging kids to get outside and connect, disconnect to connect, basically. And I think my time is up, unfortunately. I had another
Unfortunately,
question.
if you can give some kind of response in less than 15 seconds, if not, perhaps you can encapsulate your answer in someone else's time.
Madam Chair, is that for me? Are you giving me 15 seconds? Okay. So again, I am going to reiterate that the educational, program in the schools is very, very important. It has to start systematically all over Canada, and we may not see the changes within 1 year or so, but it may take an entire generation. But we have to start somewhere.
Thank you so much. Emanuela with Liberal Party, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to start by thanking all of our witnesses for being here today to inform us on this really critical issue. And I'll start with Ms. Pendizopoulos. You spoke a lot about the fact that coercive control should be criminalized, and you've said that before. And I'm wondering, in order for it to be criminalized and in order for judges to be able to use this in criminal court, they need to have a specific definition. I'm wondering if you can tell us what you would include in a definition of coercive control.
It is a coercive control. It's not a one-time thing. Neither is domestic violence. For anybody, I guess, you could be having a bad day where you can, raise your voice or something happens. But with domestic violence, it's not a one-time thing. It's not something bad happen. You never know what sets them off. So it's really a pattern. And the pattern that is daily, we victims, both the mothers and the children, we are forced to, because everything has to stay hidden, right? Because if anybody finds out, God help you. And they make it clear, they tell you that if you do or say anything, it's going to cost me $5,000, meaning he would have hired somebody to kill me. And that's on top of the attempts on my life and my children's lives. So we have to put on a face and go out in public. So when people come over, or when we go to school, or when we go out with everybody, we have that face on, and we become experts at that. At the same time, we do that to protect ourselves, but the abuser also has a face, right? And that's what the courts need to recognize. And as I wrote in my testimony, what is going on behind doors and what the public sees are two different things. So the judges and all the social actors need to recognize that they are master manipulators. So, and I'm going to quote something that one of my children testified to. There is the George that's at home, the George that's on vacation, and the George that's in court, right? There's meaning at home, the abuser. There's on vacation where he acts all nice, and even now he has a donut shop. He donates donuts, sponsors, nurses, doctors, Mr. Wonderful. But in actuality, it's that double face. So judges need to recognize that just because he looks prim and proper in court, because they're able to do that. Meanwhile, when we're in court and we're being accused of this parental alienation and we're forced to self-represent, we're trembling, we're anxious, we're nervous, because we're forced to right now question and act as a lawyer when we have, pardon the expression, no idea what the hell we're doing. So judges need to recognize this. And it's not only about training, because no amount of training, when I'm self-representing and I pick up a picture of clear abuse towards my son, and I pick it up and I show it like this to the judge, and the judge's first instinct is to tell me that, well, you could have downloaded that from the internet, when, the father's hand is in the picture. And then his next thing to do is to remove my parental authority for travel and allow him to go anywhere. No amount of training is going to change the misogynistic views that some judges have. And that's not only male judges, it's female judges. It seems to be that it's contact at all costs. And I don't know where this foundation and where this ideology came from. Sure, it would be great if parents are, both parents have a right to their children, and the children should be able to benefit from both parents. But if one is a clear danger, what are we showing these children, and how are they going to themselves become parents in the future? If we're telling them that the more you lie, the more you manipulate, the more you beat up on people, well, the courts are going to grant you everything. So the coercive control, it has to be clearly defined. The actions have to be clearly defined, that it's a pattern, that it has to do with discrediting the mother. And when they shut down your bank accounts, your email accounts, and they have your insurance sent elsewhere, those are clear patterns. And there's no age limit for coercive control, and there should be no statute of limitations because we're scared to come forward for anything.
Thank you. I'd like to also extend it to Ms. Matu if you'd like to just add what you would include in a definition.
You have 1 minute. Thank you.
We can't hear you.
You're muted right now, Deepa.
Thank you for reminding. So recognizing coercive control as abuse is crucial, and definitely what coercive control does is it strips survivors of their fundamental right and freedom. And it is definitely the pattern of violence, which is makes it so unique. What needs to be included? So I'm not for criminalizing of the coercive behavior because in my recommendation, I've given many other recommendations which needs to happen before we could get to the criminalization. But if there had to be a definition to define coercive control, it does definitely need to include that web of coercive behaviors and the pattern of the violence, which and looking at the incident-based approach is very difficult to capture for the decision makers.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Adrienne Larouche. You have 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. We are coming to see just how much of a scourge this is. And this is why so many cities are declaring that coercive violence is an epidemic. Violence against women, domestic violence is an epidemic. In Quebec, we have clearly seen that there is a scourge of murdering women. Quebec has moved forward on a number of things. We still have a great deal of work to do, but we have put forward proposals. We're trying specialized courts. Many witnesses have talked a lot about education. Criminals are better adapted, and we want to reduce the re-victimization of victims. We're looking at electronic bracelets that's being tested. Quebec has moved forward on a number of things, but the subject of this study comes from a discussion with a member of Quebec who worked on a report entitled Rebuilding Confidence. And she said, at this point, we're blocked because there is something that doesn't belong to us. We don't have a real determination of the fact that coercive control is part of many killings of women. It's not recognized. There's a pattern in the killing of many women. This whole issue of control comes up, control, manipulation, and the pattern, but we can't do anything about it specifically because it's not recognized in the criminal code. So I can see the witness nodding. Dimitra, how does this recognition, how would this recognition help? In many cases, the public just doesn't see the violence. And there is a risk in not recognizing that violence is very often a form of manipulation and control.
Things that need to come together. Coercive control needs to be criminalized because it's not. See, let me go back. When the perpetrator doesn't allow you to leave the house or to get a job or to see your friends or your family or pick up the phone when they call, that cannot, because it's not criminalized, the police will tell you, well, I don't see any bruises on you. Because somehow people believe that in order for there to be abuse and domestic violence, you need to be black and blue 24/7. But that's not the reality. The abuse exists 24/7. You're just not black and blue physically. You're black and blue emotionally, psychologically, and your heart and your soul and your children feel it. So all the actors need to come together. Yes, Quebec has come forward with Rebâtir la Confiance, and Dr. Simon Lapierre was on the committee, and they came forward. And yes, they did the electronic bracelets. But when you have youth protection, who somehow has gotten this immense power where we file criminal charges, but somehow the police are rendered helpless and powerless because youth protection is saying, no, it's parental alienation, and there has to be contact, and if there's no contact, so we're caught. If you don't leave your abuser, then you're not protecting your children, right? And youth protection will tell you, well, if you don't leave him, we're going to take your children because you're not protecting your children. And then the moment you leave, then, well, now you need to give contact, because if you're not giving contact to the father, now you're alienating the father. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there was an article in Journal de Montréal, and I'm sure Andréane must have seen it because I send a lot of things to various people, where they're called la Direction de la Protection des Hommes Violents, which in English is, instead of the Director of Youth Protection, the Director of Abusive Men. And that clearly defines exactly what they are and what they do. So all the actors need to come together. We need to criminalize coercive control, because without it, what makes a man dangerous and could end up killing his children or his wife is how controlling he is, and not how many bruises he's given her. The more control he has, and when they feel that they're missing this control, that's when they become, there's no word to describe them. That's when the ultimate danger is there. So as long as they're able to control you, fine. Like with me, he was able to physically get his hands on me and my children. The moment we separated, though, he had to become more creative. He brought in youth protection. He shut down accounts. Because he can't get his hands physically on me to hit me anymore, right? So he has to become more. So the coercive control increases at separation. It's there while you're living with him, and he controls your every move. But when you separate, the coercive control increases, and he gets all his enablers. If I'm out at an event, okay, because right now, by going to Supreme Court, youth protection lost jurisdiction. So there's no judgment that says there's no contact between my children and me. So if I'm at an event and my children are there and I try to go near them, he's going to send everybody else, all his enablers, to block me.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Adrienne. Leah with the NDP, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. Sorry. First, I want to congratulate you, Adrienne, for putting this study forward. I know that you've been very patiently waiting. And also would like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. I know that these are difficult discussions, and I want to honor that. So we're talking about coercive control. And we know with coercive control, when we talk about abuse, often it's physical. But even in physical violence, probably the most violent part of it is coercive, right? It's psychological. It's that belief of harm, that constant living in fear. One of the things that they have in Manitoba, they have a couple of programs. I'm not sure if they still run. One program they run is for the sake of the children. It actually requires parents to attend in terms of not being toxic with their kids during times of separation. But the other thing they often require, particularly when there's more invisible violence, is psychological assessments of parents. The problem with that, however, is that it costs a lot of money. Like, for example, a psychological assessment costs about $6,000, where the parents are obliged to pay it, and then they do psychological assessments of the parents. Within those psychological assessments, however, they're usually able to tell some of the things that you're talking about that you can't see through questions because they're experts. Do you think that there should be more services provided to individuals fleeing coercive control, such as paying for supports, including providing free psychological assessments to parents going through these ordeals?
The people doing the psychological assessments need to actually be experts on domestic violence. In my personal situation, there were 2 psychological assessments done where the abuse was completely ignored and it was parental alienation. So if the assessments are done by these so-called parental alienation experts, which is why it goes back to parental alienation as the form of continuation of coercion and abuse. So that in order for victims to be truly helped, it's not only about giving us free psychological assessments. Parental alienation needs to be prohibited. Coercive control needs to be criminalized. They need to understand that unless the laws are strong enough, there's no way we can protect our children and ourselves. It's not a matter of free. Even with shelters, who came up with the woman having to leave the home, pack up her things, right? Think about the realities of this. We're supposed to pick up a bag, throw a couple of things of our children's belongings in there, leave, while he stays home, king of the castle.
Yes, I appreciate that, and certainly we've spoken about that in committee about with a witness that's been frequent, Mitch Bourbonniere, who's talking about reversing that so that the family gets to stay home. My question is for Sundar Singh. You spoke a lot about income. I'm putting forward a bill. I'm starting debate on second reading tomorrow for a guaranteed livable basic income. Much of what you spoke about was financial. Even in terms of sex trafficking, I'm putting forward a bill in support of a guaranteed livable basic income, particularly in mind the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, but also to provide women who are being economically abused, as we've heard about in the committee, with the financial ability to have choice. I'm wondering if you would support putting in a guaranteed livable basic income to support keeping families safe, but also victims of violence safe, or keeping people safer from being sex trafficked, including a number of migrant workers, as we've heard in former studies, because they're financially beholden to employers.
Thank you, Leah, for this. Absolutely, I support the financial support for families and young people who are fighting, for financial stability. I absolutely support that for sure. But what I want to bring to the attention of the federal government is that we all realize that the trade skills, there's a lack of it in this country. So when there are opportunities for young people to get into developing certain skills, the federal government needs to intervene and provide that support so that once they become skilled trade workers, they become financially very stable as well. So I certainly will support you, Leah, for
of income supports and opportunities for training. And opportunities for training. A combination of the two.
Yes, absolutely.
I've run out of time. I'm sorry. I was already pressing it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'd like to begin the second round. Anna, with the Conservatives, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. This is a very important study, and I appreciate all your input because it helps us understand what recommendations we need to put forward to make sure the coercive control is something that is top priority for all women. I'm going to start with Sundar Singh. Sundar, hello, how are you?
Thank you.
I want to, congratulate you on HSCW. I know that the foundation was started in September of 1992. You and I have had many conversations. And I want to just, one of the points, the statement of clients' rights on your website, there's 8 points. And point number 1 was the one that it really resonated with me. And it says, be treated with dignity, courtesy, respect, and fairness. And so I'm listening to you, and I know we've had these conversations before. Canada is a hub for human trafficking. I recently got an update from Tamia Nagy, who we both know, that human trafficking is a business of $362 billion per year. One of the things that you mentioned, mental health resources, foster home, education, I agree with that. But in order for us to protect our children and make sure that this situation is put to an immediate stop, we have to change the law. And I believe that we have to include in that law torture, because it is torture. What these perpetrators and pimps, or whatever you want to call them, are doing is torture. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would. It's torture. It's the emotional murder of the children. They can. How can they become future leaders? We send our children to schools to learn to become leaders, but these perpetrators, they pull these innocent children out of the system, out of the society, and kill them emotionally. And, it has to stop. And these perpetrators, when they're caught, they are sent to prison. But in a few years' time, they're back again, into the mainstream of the society and starting the same criminal activity all over again. This has to stop. Once the perpetrators are caught, they should be in prison lifetime. Unless the laws are stricter, the problem will not go away.
One of the things that really resonated with me was, how do we change that law if we can include a law where it keeps these perpetrators behind bars and protect the victims? Because a lot of the times what we've heard in this committee is the victims are afraid to come forward because their families are being terrorized. Like, basically, if you go to court and you testify, we will kill your family. So would you agree that if we could get the law changed from 14 years maximum sentence to 25 years, because let's be honest, a lot of these perpetrators, you just stated, and I've spoken to Mia about it as well, they come out and they start all over again because they know the sentence doesn't match the crime. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would, MP Roberts. Yes, the laws have to become stricter. The punishments have to become harder for the perpetrators. Yes.
So I want to also mention to you you mentioned foster care, and that we have to be more diligent about placing our young children in foster care. As you know, you and I have had this conversation. I was a child of foster care, and I would agree with you that we do have to make sure that these children are being safe. One of the things that I learned during my time in foster care was that they don't really do their research before they place these children in foster care. How can we make that change? What recommendation do you have?
Okay. Listening to the witnesses today facing domestic violence and the problem that is in the society, we need to understand that the mothers who report abuse, they have to be protected, and they should still be given the authority to look after their children. The children should not be going into the care of another system where, files are created and then the children are put to the foster homes as quickly as possible for care. But what we are actually doing is that we are throwing the children again, from the frying pan into the fire. And, foster homes, many of them, we all know in Canada, foster homes are the breeding grounds for human trafficking.
Thank you very much.
It has to stop.
Thank you very much for that. Next, Sonia with the Liberals, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for the important testimony and the work you are doing for all women. My first question is to Ms. Deepa Mattu. Ms. Matu, I know we have a conversation before, and you appeared in the committee before, but the work you are doing in GTA, I know. My question is that an important component of this study is the experience of other jurisdiction is dealing with the coercive behavior. Scotland and the United Kingdom already criminalized coercive control. We also know about the experience of Hawaii, where coercive control into the definition of domestic abuse. Do you think we should follow the path? What's your views on that?
Thank you for asking that question, honorable member. One of the challenge that we have looking at the example of England and Scotland is that in England, the coercive control was criminalized in 2015, and Scotland it was criminalized in 2018, and the research coming out of both of those jurisdictions is that it has not had any significant impact on the rates of domestic abuse. And one of the bigger challenges securing convictions for the coercive control, because that has been extremely challenging. In fact, Scotland and its model is seen as a golden standard for if a country has to choose to criminalize coercive control, their coercive control, a specific offense is seen as a golden standard of legislation on domestic violence. But a research study coming out of their interviewing survivors revealed that many felt that the final sentence in their case did not reflect their whole experience, and found that psychological abuse and control, that is the biggest piece that we are talking about today. The survivors experienced that the accused, when sentenced, their experiences were never taken into full consideration by the court, and only a small aspect of the abuse that they endured was revealed during the trial. And I think that is at the crux of the challenge of thinking about criminalizing coercive control without changing the attitude of our justice system and the misogyny within the justice system. So this solution of criminalizing an offense might actually trigger a situation where we will see survivors like Maria, the story that I shared with all of you, finding themselves instead criminalized in the system and facing the challenge instead of actually the real perpetrators facing the consequences and accountability that we want.
My next questions to Sundar Singh. You talked about youth mental health strategy, also talking about the role of social media. I know in this budget, this week is a mental health awareness week. I know in this budget there's a $500 million are allocating to the youth mental health. So what do you think, what recommendation can you give to the committee, how this federal funding can best respond to the need and educate and support to the youth mental health?
MP Sidhu, thank you very much for the question. Again, I have to bring it to the attention of the Standing Committee that constant, regular, continuous education for the young people at the same time for the parents is very important. The results you will not see, overnight. It would take an entire generation maybe to see the results. But, the work that is being done by the federal government to create awareness, through mental health program is critical. But the funding has to be allocated to the educational system, to the community organizations, and done in a very proactive, active manner, so that the country, the people need to understand that this is a problem in this country, and what we need to do to change the system.
My next question is about cultural sensitivity. How do you ensure that the information you share with the victims is culturally sensitive, and how can we train frontline staff on cultural sensitivity when dealing with the coercive control?
I'm very sorry, Sonia, but we don't have enough time for the witnesses to answer, and perhaps, again, they could include that somewhere else. I apologize for that. If all the members could be mindful of the 30 seconds when I am raising it, just for the benefit of everyone. Okay, folks. We are at Adrienne Larouche. You have 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can see how sensitive this issue is. And we really have to think about finding ways of solving the problem. Criminalizing coercive control can be part of the process of reflection aimed at helping victims further. Ms. Sunder, you talked about another scourge that I'm very concerned about with modern-day slavery and human trafficking. We've conducted a study here at this committee, and I'd like you to tell me about the links we can draw between coercive control and the way in which that can lead to the trafficking of women and girls.
If I can understand your question, what you're talking about, what you're asking is what leads to this kind of coercive behavior. It starts with the financial struggle that the young people face, or the relationship that the young people have with their parents. Again, the education in school will teach the children respecting the family, respecting the parents, and respecting the gender. That's where it all starts. What happens is, as the children are growing up, the teenagers, they rebel at home, they leave their homes, and they seek for help outside. And once they get into that process, they find themselves getting trapped by perpetrators who are spread all over the country. They are in schools, they are in universities, they are in colleges, everywhere they can be found. And they are great at targeting. They know who are the vulnerable people who can be victimized easily. So, and then, the process starts. But it has to start with the human studies that I am suggesting that should take place in the schools, supported and made mandatory by the federal government for the provincial governments to add to the curricula, that the children in schools, the start of the day, must be educated, must understand the respect of human beings and what they need to do to
Thank you so
keep
much.
themselves safe.
Thank you so much for that. Leah with the NDP, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very quickly, just because I only have 2.5 minutes, Madame Matu, I just want to see if I understood what you said. Do you feel that one of the issues with putting in a law around coercive control is that it, in fact, could potentially be used against the person who's actually the victim? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's my concern.
Okay, great. The other question I have for you is in regards to building on what my colleague MP Sidhu was talking about. Do you think it's one of the things we've talked about is the critical need for individuals fleeing violence to have culturally relevant places to go? And how important is it? Because I know that you've done a lot of work with newcomer families. Do you feel there's a gap right now, and how is it important? How important is it to fill that gap?
I think the service design for all the services, including the frontline from the state, should be extremely trauma-informed and culturally sensitive. I don't believe in the concept of cultural competence because there is no such thing as being competent with cultures, because cultures evolve, move, change, and no two people from same culture can have same cultural experience. So cultural sensitivity requires to have all of those good elements of being trauma-informed, being anti-racist, anti-oppressive, listening carefully and thoughtfully, and And unfortunately, because of the bias that exists in the system against the gender-specific bias of misogyny and patriarchy, we see time and again the state response not sensitive. So cultural sensitivity is definitely required, but I don't necessarily agree that it can only be provided in spaces which are just designed for particular cultures, because that breeds homogenization and that breeds othering of the communities. I think what really needs to happen is that all spaces need to learn what it means to be trauma-informed and culturally sensitive.
So just to end off, thank you so much that you believe that these spaces, we don't want to other groups, but we need to make sure that all spaces are reflective of, first of all, the populations they're serving and are always culturally relevant to the people using their services.
Yes, I
Nodding
completely
up the heads,
agree.
perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So that will conclude our first panel. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank our witnesses for your testimony. We will suspend for about 5 minutes to transition into our second panel. And just because we didn't get to a third round, is it consensus that we will commence with Dominique and then Anita on your side? We'll just continue on. Okay, perfect. All right, we'll suspend for 5 minutes. Exactly. We will resume our meeting and the study of coercive behavior. We are now here to welcome our second panel of witnesses. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of our witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. And for those participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verifications Officer. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. You have the choice of either floor, English, or French for your earpiece. If interpretation is lost, please let me know right away. I would like now to welcome our witnesses from the National Association of Women and the Law. We have Suzanne Zakour, Director of Legal Affairs. And we also have from SEGES Domestic Violence Prevention Society, sharing their time is Andrea Silverstone, Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference, and Carrie McManus, Director of Innovation and Programs, also by video conference. You will each have, each group will have 5 minutes for opening remarks, followed by a round of questions. I'd like to give the floor to Suzanne first to start for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci au comité pour l'invitation à témoigner aujourd'hui. Donc, je suis Suzanne Zakour, docteur en droit et directrice des affaires juridiques pour l'Association nationale Femmes et Droits. The National Association is a feminist law reform organization which in 2024 is celebrating 50 years of legal leadership to advance women's rights. Coercive control is a serious and often life-threatening form of violence against women, characterized by severe entrapment and liberty deprivation. The response to this violence can take the form of a new crime as a way to recognize the persistent gaps in how the criminal justice system addresses intimate partner violence. At the same time, the ability of the criminal justice system to deliver justice to survivors of intimate partner violence has been called into question. And importantly, many survivors, including some of the most marginalized, choose not to engage with the police or the criminal justice system. And these survivors should also be protected by our society and our institutions. I'd like to focus on how, when there are children involved, coercive and controlling partners can enlist the family justice system to further their entrapment of women. You know, 2 days ago, as I was preparing for this testimony, I received an email from a victim facing fines and 8 days of incarceration. Her, not her abuser. And if she doesn't return her kid to her violent ex, she'll be found in contempt. À quelques détails près, les femmes qui nous contactent nous racontent toutes la même histoire.
For the most part, the women we see tell us the same stories. They've left their partners, they've become embroiled in the justice system, and I've seen their children entrusted to an abusive father. How have courts come to this, and why are they entrusting children to a violent father? This is on the basis of a pseudoscientific theory that's taken root in our courts of justice, the theory of parental alienation.
Parental alienation is a theory which suggests that when a child doesn't want to see their father, it's the mother's fault. In practice, this concept is being used in family courts across the country to punish mothers for disclosing family violence. And rather than being listened to and validated in their experience of abuse or neglect, children are told that their feelings are not appropriate. Children are being forced to spend time or even live with their father, even when they greatly fear him. The concept of parental alienation and its dramatic interventions, such as children being prevented from having any contact with their primary caregiver, are not supported by credible science. They rely on myths and stereotypes about family violence, and they are causing extreme harm to mothers and children. This is why the National Association of Women and the Law and 250 other feminist organizations across all provinces and 2 territories in Canada are calling for the federal government to ban parental alienation accusations from being used in family court. This demand echoes a recent report by the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, which called on all countries to legislate to prohibit the use of parental alienation concepts in family law. Spain has explicitly prohibited, through legislation, the use of this pseudo concept. Canada needs to be next. There can be no justice or safety for victims of coercive control if they are deterred from leaving or denouncing a violent partner due to the fear of losing their children because of family courts relying on harmful myths and stereotypes. So to protect victims and to free mothers and children from enduring coercion and control, we ask this committee to echo our call to the Minister of Justice by including in its report the following recommendation: to ban parental alienation accusations from being used in family court. Merci de votre attention. Il me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions and to elaborate on the situation in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would welcome Andrea Silverstone.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting us to speak on this important topic. Domestic abuse is far more than a black eye or a broken bone, but all too often we focus on instances of physical abuse, since that's what our laws commonly recognize, leaving the 60 to 80% of survivors who experience non-physical forms of abuse to go unvalidated and unsupportive. I'm hopeful that with this study, that you agree that we must stop this epidemic of violence by seriously considering legislation to prevent and intervene in cases of coercive control. Many jurisdictions around the world have taken steps to address coercive control, which we define as a pattern of behavior that removes personal agency. As already mentioned, England, Wales, and Scotland have enacted coercive control legislation. In addition, legislation to address coercive control within domestic violence has been enacted in Ireland, Australia, 3 US states, with 3 more pending, and in South Africa. There, they've established domestic violence courts that require police to refer victims to appropriate supports and have enacted provisions for the financial support of survivors. France is the only country that has coercive control legislation that governs both domestic violence and cults and groups that use mental manipulation. While there are many things that we can learn from these jurisdictions, the greatest thing that we want to emphasize today is that coercive control is a framework that allows victims to see their experiences recognized and validated. They are then empowered to share their stories and seek help. 3 years before the United Kingdom criminalized coercive control, they changed their definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. Their Home Office began talking about it in this way, and the social sector talked about it as coercive control as well. And in those 3 years, domestic abuse calls to the police increased 31%. In addition, research from the College of Policing in the UK found that once enacted, the law enhanced the police response to domestic abuse, allowing for earlier and more effective intervention, and that there have not been any identified issues with charges laid against victims. This radical change spotlights the power of changing the public discourse and the legislation around coercive control and abuse. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Carrie McManus, who's our Director of Innovations and Programs.
Thanks, Andrea. Today, I want to talk about what we have heard from people impacted by coercive control. I cannot emphasize enough that the way that we talk about abuse today has a very personal impact on how survivors view themselves, how they understand and contextualize their experiences, and the steps that they take to get support. For many, coercive control is like an invisible cage. They feel its effects but have trouble defining it in their own lives. Too often at SAGES, we get calls from survivors downplaying their own abuse, even though they've had their ability to make decisions in their own best interest stolen from them. They're not sure that they deserve or need our help. I had a client once who shared with me a story of an ex randomly popping up, showing up, including when they were out and they were running. They never exchanged a word, but the client was terrified. Even as they were told or told themselves it was a coincidence and they weren't in any danger. This doubt and questioning often happens when survivors bravely face social stigma and shame to share their stories with their friends, family, and colleagues. That's why any move to address coercive control must include these informal supporters who are pivotal to eradicating violence. 80% of people who experience abuse tell a friend or family member first. If they have a positive conversation where their experiences of coercive control are taken seriously, they are more likely to seek out formal support and have positive outcomes. One example of this comes to mind from an unlikely informal supporter. He worked as a banking associate. He provided a unique window into the personal lives of these customers, including those impacted by coercive control. Over a few months, he developed a friendly relationship with a customer who was a newcomer to Canada. One day, when the client came in to set up a bank account, they seemed to be particularly distracted, checking their phone every few minutes. When asking if everything was okay, the customer shared that things had been stressful at home, and their partner was tracking their location throughout the day. Having had other clients disclose similar situations, this particularly newcomers who didn't know where else to go for help, he was happy to direct them to Say-Jess. This is one of many examples of regular Canadians empowered to intervene because they understand coercive control and the terrible impact it has on individuals, families, and communities. To turn the tide on abuse, we must do more. This includes employing a coercive control lens in drafting legislation, helping every Canadian to recognize and talk about abuse, and increasing support for survivors and their supporters who will be empowered to seek out help in far greater numbers. Thank you for your time today and for your attention to this dangerous form of abuse.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. At this point, we will move to our rounds of questions. I'd like to start with Dominique. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say that we're all old enough around this table to understand that coercive control does not affect only young women or women who are in a financially precarious situation. It can affect all women, and particularly women, of course. The first question would be to Ms. Silverstone or Ms. McManus, given that you're from the same organization. You talked about the family and the environment. These are bulwarks that should exist and that should help call out situations. In your view, are there any specific characteristics that define or show coercive control?
This actually has developed a program that we have called Real Talk, which teaches informal supporters how to recognize domestic violence, empathize, ask the right questions, and listen. Because we do believe that there are absolutely indicators that people can recognize that can identify coercive control, whether it's in a workplace setting, a family setting, or even in a community setting. And these are things like Carrie just talked about in her introductory remarks, someone getting incessant texts and those texts making them stressed out, or someone constantly, canceling on plans, or anyone who's unable to make decisions in their own best interest. But I think that what's most important is that coercive control has to be identified through conversations where you have to be able to say to the person, are you afraid? And I think that that is the very best way that we can actually ever identify whether or not someone is experiencing coercive control.
Les dames l'ont dit tout à l'heure, ça n'arrive pas.
As the ladies were saying, this doesn't happen overnight. How does the pattern develop? Before you get married, you see the person. There should be some warning lights popping up on the dashboard, right?
You would think so. And I wish that it was easy, and I wish that coercive controllers had a sign on their forehead. But I think that, one of the previous speakers talked about trafficking and sexual exploitation, and really coercive control in cases of intimate partner violence is no different. It's not like on the very first date, someone, begins to control or picks up their fist and hits someone. It's a very slow process where it is low level and it is persistent and it is a pattern, and where all of a sudden one day it's a gradual and then sudden process where one day someone wakes up and realizes that they no longer have personal freedoms or are able to make decisions in their own best interest.
C'était aussi les contrôlants.
the controlling people are also quite intelligent enough to hide what they're doing. Thank you. Ms. Cour, thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. I have two questions for you. First of all, I'd like you to come back to the example of the stranger that we can draw inspiration from, because we will have to table recommendations to make things better. Training people, training judges, training Crown prosecutors, and training lawyers, perhaps even at the bar or in university courses, we could highlight this. What kind of education do people need to properly understand what coercive control is? We've got narcissistic personalities, all kinds of profiles. How do you train people? I'll begin with your second question. One thing that's very important to me and that I'd like to clarify is that at this point, the law permits family courts to use the concept of parental alienation, even though it's been discredited. So even if training is provided, it won't do much good because it's the legislation that needs to be changed. Moreover, survivors tend to minimize the violence they've experienced, and at the same time, courts are applying a principle almost that says women exaggerate the violence they've been subjected to. There has been training, but it hasn't given the results we hoped for, and we hope that the committee will recommend amendments to family law legislation. Even if judges understand what coercive control is, there's a theory that says what the mother says isn't true, and even if it is true, the father should have the right to see the children or to have the children live with him. In your experience, is parental alienation overused as a concept in Quebec courts? It's used almost systematically when a woman is a victim of violence and coercive control. Almost systematically, the controlling person says, I'm not being aggressive, but she's alienating the children. I see I have a few seconds left. I can talk to you about Spain. The Spanish government has passed legislation saying courts cannot use pseudo-non-scientific concepts like parental alienation, and by giving a very clear directive saying that is not an admissible grounds in court, that is clear, and it's also what the UN special rapporteur recommends.
You have 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, and I want to thank both of you, and especially for the work that you do. My first question is for Suzanne. You've spoken quite a bit about the myths and the stereotypes that underpin the legal system and the support systems, but could you maybe elaborate a little bit on specifically what those myths and stereotypes are?
Tout à fait. Merci pour la question. Donc,
yes, thank you for the question. Society, including family courts.
So one of the primary myths is the idea that we should be very suspicious when family violence is reported. So whether it's the mother or the child reporting violence, or especially if the mother reports sexual abuse against the child, we should be very suspicious. So the myth is that women lie, women exaggerate, children can't be trusted. And also, women need to forgive. So, it's been years. She's still angry. The child is still angry. So there must be something going on. It can't be the normal effects of domestic violence. So these are some of the myths that are very pervasive in our court systems.
Thank you very much for that, and I will try to get back to you if I have enough time. But I also did want to go to Andrea because you talked about the UK and the criminalizing and whether or not it might get used against victims. And we heard in the previous testimony that there is a fear that by criminalizing coercive behavior, it could be used against the very women that need the protection. But it sounded in your testimony like you said that that hasn't happened in the UK. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. So The College of Policing has done some extensive research on how the law has been used, and also to answer some of the concerns that I think that were pre-existing before the law was there, as well as are the concerns I think we have in Canada, both about it being used against victims, as well as being used against marginalized and racialized populations. And their research has found that actually that's not the case at all. And if anything, the law has further protected those populations and hasn't been used in the re-victimization and hasn't been used in re-victimization. I think that it's a fear that does need to be addressed. I think that we have to understand why it hasn't been used in those negative ways that we're afraid of. I think it has to do with training and with funding put into training, judges, lawyers, police officers. But I do think that there is absolutely a way to enact the law without having a concern of victims being re-victimized.
Thank you. And so it can't be done by itself. It has to be done with the wraparounds, is what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. It has to be done wraparound.
And you talked about your story about the bank and about the role that bystanders can play if they are knowledgeable and if they're trained on how to identify. I wonder, in terms of, we're a federal government, so in terms of what tools we have in the federal jurisdiction, do you have particular recommendations that are things that we could actually do in order to help with bystanders or in any of the other areas?
Absolutely. We've actually put in a brief that was part of the report on the Standing Committee for Justice around coercive control with 5 recommendations in particular for the federal government. But some of those recommendations include, we think that there should be some sort of commissioner of coercive control or domestic abuse that is able to infuse all parts of the federal government with a lens to understand coercive control and how it needs to be infused. One of the previous speakers talked about trafficking and sexual exploitation. We actually have written a position paper for the Federal Ombudsman on Victims of Crime exactly around that. So that's something that some sort of commissioner like that would be able to do.
Could you send to our committee the same brief that you sent and maybe
yes,
that report
absolutely.
as well?
I'll do that. Yeah.
Have, Madam Chair? I have a minute. Okay, good. So I'll go back to Suzanne. And I just want to delve a little bit more into, your recommendation was that the federal government, that the Justice Minister take action with regard to the parental alienation. And I don't know if that's in federal jurisdiction, so that's one question. But what would that look like? And you mentioned Spain, but are there other countries that have done the same thing?
Thank you for the question. So what we're asking for is for the federal government to amend the Divorce Act and to say that accusations of parental alienation are not admissible, that judges can't consider them, and they can't admit expert testimony on alienation. Of course, we'll then go knocking on the province's doors to do the same for unmarried partners. In terms of Spain, obviously it's a different structure, but that's what they did. They said it's not admissible. Children have a right to be heard. They have a right to be respected in their opinion, because parental alienation is saying the child does not want to be with their father, therefore I should force them to be with the father. And there are other countries that have gone the other way, said we need to address parental alienation, not the accusations, but we need to punish alienating mothers. And they're now backtracking because they've seen how sexual abuse of children and other violence is going up and is going undetected because of trying to punish mothers when there are allegations of violence.
Perfect. Thank you. Next, we have Adrienne. You have 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for bringing forward these thoughts on a very important subject. Of course, it'll take more than a magic wand to deal with violence against women. There's a real epidemic, but I think that we need to carry out this study with great seriousness and try to gain as good an understanding as possible of what's going on and look at what's being done elsewhere as well. Ms. Silverstone or Ms. McManus, you must be dealing with international issues quite a lot. My colleagues have put questions on it too, but I'd like to come back to it. To your knowledge, in countries that have criminalized coercive control, have any of these countries tried to walk it back because they regretted criminalizing it, or did it work out as something positive? Is there a country that walked it back?
There are no countries that have walked it back. And in terms of conversations, both in the research that we've done with lawmakers, the justice system, as well as organizations on the ground, there has been either a sense that the law has been a resounding success, or the law is good, but just isn't being used enough in terms of the protections that it can offer to victims. But it's that it's a good law. There's just not been enough support in order to enact the law.
Intéressant.
To finish on the international aspect of the issue, you talked about France, which has been an outlier, but I know, having had international meetings with French members of parliament, that the issue of criminalizing coercive control is something they're thinking about and is under discussion. Is that something you've seen as well?
So they actually do have coercive control legislation of a form. It's called the About Picard law. And it's actually a very, very broad criminalization of coercive control that's not specific to intimate partner violence. It covers any type of coercion. So it's also been used in cases of cults and, religiously coercive groups. The discussions in France are to expand the law or to enhance their laws, to lay it over specifically intimate partner violence, but they've already had that law existing. I think they just want to enhance it in order to make it more specific to intimate partner violence.
Right. I hadn't understood properly when you said that France was an exception, because I had thought they had such legislation as well. Thank you for the clarification. Recently, I traveled to a conference on violence against women organized by women's groups in my region. Coercive control was discussed as an important issue, that it needed to be recognized that violence wasn't always shown by bruises. Violence doesn't always hit, but always hurts. That was a campaign in Quebec to raise awareness of violence against women. At present, there is a Bill C-332 that is going to be dealing with domestic violence, and it is going to be examined by the Justice Committee. Bill C-332, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at it and form an opinion. So, Ms. Silverstone, Ms. McManus, is there something you could add about what we're doing here in Canada?
So we actually had an opportunity to work with Laurel Collins on the development and writing of that bill, and so we are very familiar with it. We do have some recommendations around the length of time that the bill should be applicable for post-relationship, as well as what types of relationship the bill should cover. We also generally think that actually coercive control should also cover incidents of sexual exploitation, which the bill does not currently cover. We've also written a brief around the changes and additions that we think need to accompany the bill. We also think that it's critical that any bill that's passed in Canada have wraparound supports and services and training that come with it.
Le continuum de service, c'est absolument essentiel.
A service continuum is crucial. That's the message that has emerged from the work done in Quebec. We raise awareness, yes. We educate, yes, but we need to make sure that resources to support victims are there. So we're well aware of how important it is to have a continuum of service in support of the legislation.
It's up in about 10, 15 seconds and an answer. That'd be great. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if there was a question or just 100% we heartily agree.
Je faisais juste rappeler en oui ou non, donc le continuum de...
Just a yes or no. Service continuum is really important in supporting activities to deal with coercive control. You did say, but I wanted to make sure it was clear.
I think I see a nodding yes for the analysts. Leah, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. So I want to fully disclose, I totally believe that coercive control exists. I think it's a very misunderstood violence, and the onus is often placed on the victim to prove that it's occurring. And I really appreciate what you said, Madame Zakour. And it's difficult in the way that I think, and everything you said I agreed with, that victims of violence often minimize the violence, but we still have, and we know this through stats, we know which groups are higher represented in violence, and there's still a lot of discrimination in the courts. I would say Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Something needs to happen about violence. We need to deal with this violence. My concern, as I asked in the last round, around coercive control specifically, I want to actually go back to parental alienation. Do you think that having a bill first with coercive control without first dealing with this non-scientific reality often used primarily against women on parental alienation places them more at risk?
Thank you for the question. We do have those concerns. There are two things that are important, maybe three. So first, any criminal bill will not help the victims who don't go and report, or if there are no charges or there are no convictions. And it can be even worse if there's no convictions than the suspicion that she lied. The other thing is, even when there's a conviction for family violence, the courts are still using that parental alienation trump card and finding that there's been a conviction, guilty plea. However, the mother needs to move on and the child needs to love the father. So that's happening, including in cases where we've been involved. And the third thing that might happen is that abusers will claim mother's protective behavior, will claim that this is alienation, and it's itself a form of coercive control. So we're seeing the abusers reusing that language, which they often do, using the equality language, and twisting it. So we do have the concern that if we want to, the priority for many women who have children is first separate safely. And the criminal justice is not going to it doesn't interact directly with the family justice system, so it doesn't is not enough to help them separate safely from the abuser and protect their children.
I think that's why I'm asking all these questions, because I want to know if there was a bill that was put in place in support of changing the criminal code to include coercive control. How can that be done in your mind in a way that is safe, that doesn't further marginalize victims?
So in our opinion, because of the concerns with the criminalization of coercive control, there are priority interventions that need to come before. So that would be ending women's financial dependence, making women safe to leave, reforming family law, removing those accusations of parental alienation, because now we're telling women, you need to report the coercive control, but then if you do, you might lose your kids. So first, we need to address these really priority issues, make women safe. Otherwise, we fear that it won't help as many women as it could, and it could even backfire in some cases. So that's why we're focusing on some priority issues, because if the system is ill-equipped to deal with this new crime, and if charges are dropped or abuses are found not guilty, and then women have to pay for this disclosure and are punished for this disclosure, that will be a real problem that could make the situation either not better or even worse for some victims.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I'm not going to talk about it too long, but I always have to ask it. I do have a bill that I'll be speaking to tomorrow for a guaranteed livable basic income for that very reason. Is that one of the pieces, yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Just going back to, eventually getting to a bill on coercive control, do you feel if all of those pieces were looked after, because I do have a concern about the pieces around parental alienation, and we heard from a former witness just today about their experiences with parental alienation and how that was used. So these are my concerns, right? Not that I'm, the other one is that and maybe I'm wrong and you can correct me, that the onus to prove coercive control is still left on victims who are often, when they're doing it, dealing with a lot of psychological and emotional trauma and scars that make it difficult. Is that right?
I see time is up, but yes, it can be very difficult to demonstrate coercive control if the actors are not properly trained and don't know what it looks like.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next round, we have Michelle Ferrari, 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So much to unpack here because it's trying to get to the crux of the justice part of this. Okay, in the 42nd Parliament, former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould amended the Divorce Act in Bill C-78 to introduce the term family violence, meaning any conduct, whether or not the conduct constitutes a criminal offense by a family member towards another family member that is violent or threatening or that constitutes a pattern of coercive and controlling behavior or that causes the other family to fear for their own safety or for that of the other person. It goes on, and in the case of the child. And so there's a group that Canadian Equal Parenting Council, and I think it is really important. We are a status of women, so we're here for women, but I think it's really important to put on the record that men are often and can be victims of coercive control as well, and children are often the ones that are hurt. And I guess my question is to you, Ms. Zakor, when we talk about child alienation, or parental alienation, sorry, I just want to read into the record what this states. Parental alienation happens when one parent coerces or controls a child to reject the other parent without justification. It is distinguished in practice from estrangement by evidence and professional investigation. Peer-reviewed and published academic research concludes that alienation of children from a parent is emotional abuse. The long-term effects on children are well documented as those the capacity to give and accept love from a parent. It goes on and goes and further. The reconciliation or the problem is a couple of things. One, which has been brought up, we need the right people investigating and interviewing these children, which I know I recently just visited the Toba Center in Winnipeg. I highly recommend everybody here look into that. It's a child advocacy center. But how do we change the law? Because what happens is the parent who could be doing coercive control, once the child is of 15 or teenage years, they don't know that they're in a coercive control position per se. This is the whole issue around coercive control. It's very, very challenging because the people often don't even know that they're in an unhealthy relationship, and the children are subject to terrible situations, but they don't know that one parent is manipulating them or doing that. How do we put that into a legal system? How do we train judges to know what that is? I know I'm asking a million different questions here, but I think the two recommendations we're trying to get out of is, should we be making parental alienation illegal, and should we be making coercive control illegal in the criminal code? And I'll start with whoever wants to answer.
It's really important. What we're asking for is to ban accusations of parental alienation. If we go the route of making parental alienation illegal, we're going to end up like Brazil and Mexico, where they've seen that women are being punished for disclosing abuse. And you mentioned, I don't know which definition you were reading from, but the idea that parental alienation is distinguished in practice from realistic estrangement due to violence is not the case. the parental alienation is not distinguished from family violence, and there, in the scientific literature, there is no objective, reliable instrument to distinguish the two. So it comes down to just an opinion. So the problem is that every time we say this child has been alienated by their mother, it's often the mother who's accused, it could very well be, and often is, the child is actually reacting to the father's violence, and it's the mother who is being punished. And I'll follow up with a brief to this committee addressing some of the frequently asked questions on what the science does and doesn't show, but it's really important that the accusations are being used to punish victims.
Thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate that. I only have 20 seconds. If anybody can submit written testimony to the committee, I would very much appreciate that. And I know we just have a few minutes left, but from Sagis Domestic Prevention Society, if you have anything to add for 15 seconds.
We think that there should be a criminalization of coercive control. We think it adds another tool in the toolbox of the justice system, both in terms of family law, which is great that it's part of our Divorce Act now, as well as the criminalization of it. And I think just to address your issue that men experience coercive control, one of the reasons that we think that coercive control should be one of the frameworks that we look at is because it's a non-gendered framework that actually allows whomever is the victim to get the support that they need, regardless of their gender.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you. Emanuela with the Liberals.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here with us and for sharing this testimony. I'm going to take it to a different place a little bit, because we've spoken about the fact that victims don't often come forward, they're afraid, they don't always know that they deserve the help or that they're in a situation where they need the help. And we're talking about master manipulators here, right? So they're in this web and they don't necessarily recognize it. And I think the first place to call if somebody is experiencing this is likely the police. And if they go to the police, given that you've likely worked with many victims, both groups here today, what is the experience that they have at that first line of contact at the police? What are their experiences? Are they listened to? Is it taken seriously? Are they dismissed? What is their experience?
I'd love to jump in here and just talk a little bit about the experiences of our clients and what we hear from police. And I think we often hear from police that they are looking for coercive control legislation because it allows them to actually enact and move forward on what they're seeing. They see those patterns, they see the fear, they see the things that are happening, but they are bound within the confines of what they can do in terms of those responses. And so police across Alberta work very closely with social services to ensure that people are getting those connections, but they are looking for something that allows them to actually do that better and to be able to respond better. I also think that, I will draw us back to the 80% stat of people actually are not necessarily calling police first and foremost. And across the country, we know that people often don't disclose to police, but they do talk to friends and family. And they talk to people around them. And I think that's where the ability to take something like coercive control and the criminalization gives it a validity and a movement towards starting to understand greater the impact of what is happening and how that is impacting our families and our communities, so that everyone can start to say, I notice that this thing is going on. Are you okay? Because I now understand what domestic abuse looks like.
Suzanne, would you like to add to that?
Maybe I'll just add briefly that even though the manipulation is real and the confusion is real, women are also experts in their danger assessments, in the sense that if they're afraid, there's a reason. And that's where both the police and the family justice system need to believe that if a woman is afraid for her life and for her children's lives, is because there is real danger, is not in her head, she's not imagining it. So I think it's a very important guideline to understand that women are not exaggerating. They're being placed in those very difficult and hard to believe situations, but they're real nonetheless.
Thank you. I guess the last question I'll ask is, if we were to criminalize coercive control, what are some safeguards that can be put in place to ensure that victims aren't the ones who end up paying for it?
So I think that we should look to other jurisdictions who've done an amazing job in terms of their statutory guidelines around coercive control to ensure that victims have safeguards around them, and especially marginalized victims that come from BIPOC backgrounds. So the United Kingdom has put in some great statutory guidelines. Scotland has some great statutory guidelines. Australia has started developing statutory guidelines around their legislation. And so I think that we should look to other jurisdictions as well. We should look to our community-based organizations who are experts in areas of equity and ask them what sort of guidelines they think should be put into place.
Something that we almost always recommend every time we're called to testify on a variety of violence against women matters is independent legal advice to victims is also really important, even before they report or as they report. So that can also, I think, really help victims understand their options and help them understand the process and can support them in not being re-victimized in this process.
Thank you. Both Adrienne and Leah, you both have 2.5 minutes left. Would you like an opportunity to have even a minute and a half? Or are you comfortable with a minute and a half? Okay, so we'll start Adrienne, a minute and a half.
Donc, Ms. Silverstone, in your recommendations, you explained what you had done before the Justice Committee, and both you and the preceding panel brought up human trafficking. How would criminalizing coercive control have an impact on human trafficking, which is also a scourge? How would it be significant in human trafficking? And when it comes to controlling sexual violence, even online, how could it be helpful?
Thank you so much for the question. So the experience of sexual exploitation is actually also an experience of coercive control. We have actually written extensively about it, some of it published, and I'm happy to share it with the committee. And essentially, by expanding and extending criminalization of coercive control to include victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking, it would actually give the police yet another tool in their toolbox to intervene sooner into the experiences of sexual exploitation, as well as it would give victims of sexual exploitation more tools to understand what was happening to them and possibly reach out for supports without feeling like they're going to be stigmatized for making decisions that people often ask them, things like, why did you stay, or why didn't you run away, or any of those things. The criminalization of coercive control will change that discourse and make them understand that there are supports and services available.
Thank you so much. Leah?
Thank you so much. I think it's important to look at what other countries have done, but I also acknowledge that Canada has a very distinct legal history, including with Indigenous peoples. We just finished a study on the red dress alert, and one of the things that became clear is the mistrust of police because of either over-policing or under-policing. The minimization, particularly of violence when it comes to Indigenous women. Do you think that particularly BIPOC women, and I would say in my question specifically Indigenous, who have higher rates of violence, or more at risk for some of the things you were talking about in terms of the minimization, she's being hysterical, like in terms of this potential legislation causing, instead of, with the intention of doing good, causing harm?
Thank you
So
for...
I think that, go ahead, Suzanne, if you would like.
Sorry. Thank you for the question. I think it's really important to take into account the specific vulnerabilities and the colonial system when thinking about these kinds of reforms. Often, for Indigenous women in particular, they're additional risk factors, the risk of being disbelieved, also financial precarity that might contribute to a situation of coercive control or make it more difficult to escape the situation of coercive control, escape and then potentially report or not report. So definitely there needs to be support systems in place and holistic interventions and all the factors that lead to violence.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that will conclude our second panel. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of the witnesses for your appearance. Is the committee in agreement to adjourn today? Thank you, Chair. You're right. Meeting adjourned.